The desert night was alive with chaos. What had begun as a carefully planned mission was unraveling into a storm of dust, gunfire, and desperate shouts. The SEAL team had been sent to capture a high-value target in a remote village carved into the barren landscape of the Middle East. Intelligence suggested it would be a quick strike, a surgical raid in and out before dawn. But intelligence, like the desert wind, could change in an instant. Now, as tracer rounds sliced the sky and explosions shook the ground, it was clear they had walked into something much larger than expected. The SEAL commander, a broad-shouldered veteran named Hayes, crouched behind a crumbling wall with his men scattered in defensive positions. Sweat dripped into his eyes, stinging with the grit of sand that clung to everything in the night air. The enemy was everywhere, fighters on rooftops, snipers hidden in the shadows, mortar pounding the earth around them. The team was outnumbered, outgunned, and quickly running out of options. A rocket-propelled grenade screamed overhead, exploding in a deafening roar that rattled Hayes's chest. One of his men cursed, another shouted for ammo. The firefight had been going on for more than an hour, and their magazines were running dangerously low. Hayes scanned the horizon, searching for any escape route, but the village's narrow alleys had become a maze of death. Every exit was covered by enemy fire. They were trapped. Hayes knew what had to be done. It was the call every ground commander dreaded, but sometimes needed, the call for air support. Without it, the mission would end in blood and silence, buried in the sands of a hostile land. He ripped the comms device from his vest, his voice hoarse but commanding as he keyed the mic. "Overlord, this is Viper Team. We are pinned down and requesting immediate close air support. Repeat, immediate air support. We've got heavy contact, multiple hostiles, grid coordinates to follow." Static hissed in his ear. For a heartbeat, nothing came back. Hayes's men looked at him, their faces pale under the glow of muzzle flashes. They all knew what it meant if no one answered. Then the comms crackled to life. "This is Eagle One," a voice replied, calm and clear. "I've got you covered." The words cut through the chaos like a blade. For a second, the firefight seemed to pause. Bullets still whizzed, explosions still thundered, but the SEAL team froze in disbelief. They had expected a deep, gravelly male voice, the kind they were used to hearing from combat pilots, hardened by years of missions. Instead, what came back was unmistakably a woman's voice. Quiet, steady, unshaken. Hayes blinked, momentarily thrown off. Around him, one of his men muttered, "Did she just say?" but cut himself off as another volley of gunfire forced him back down. The commander's grip tightened on the radio. He didn't have time to question who was in the sky. Lives were hanging by a thread. Still, in the back of his mind, disbelief gnawed. A female combat pilot? Out here, over this battlefield? But the voice spoke again, sharper this time. "Mark your position, Viper Team. Laser designator on my mark." Hayes's hesitation vanished. Doubt was a luxury he couldn't afford. He grabbed the laser pointer and aimed it skyward, sweeping across the target zone. "Copy that, Eagle One. Position marked, above the desert." Unseen by the men below, a jet thundered through the night sky. Its engines roared, slicing through the air as it closed in on the coordinates. The pilot's hands moved with mechanical precision, flipping switches, arming weapons, her eyes scanning the tactical display. To her, the chaos below was numbers, grids, and flashing indicators. But in her headset, she could hear the desperation in Hayes's voice, the urgency of soldiers who were seconds away from being overrun. Back on the ground, the SEALs braced themselves. Some exchanged looks, half relief, half doubt. Could she really deliver? Was she as sharp in the cockpit as her voice was on the radio? Hayes crouched lower, heart pounding. For all his experience, For all the times he had led his men into fire, he had never felt quite like this, caught between hope and skepticism, betting everything on a pilot whose voice seemed too calm, too soft for the storm of war. "Stand by." Eagle One's voice came again, as steady as before. "You're going to feel it." Seconds later, the night lit up. The jet screamed overhead, a shadow against the moonlit clouds. Then, the ground erupted in a controlled fury. A missile struck with pinpoint accuracy, shaking the earth beneath them and throwing plumes of dust into the air. Enemy fighters scattered, their gunfire faltering under the sudden shockwave. The SEALs cheered instinctively, adrenaline surging through their veins. One of them shouted, "Holy hell, she's good." But Hayes said nothing. He kept his eyes on the sky, listening to that calm voice cutting through the madness, directing them with the authority of someone who had done this before. "Targets neutralized in Sector 3. Hold position." More runs inbound, and just like that, the battlefield shifted. For the first time that night, Hayes allowed himself a flicker of relief. The quiet voice that had stunned his men moments ago was now the sound of survival. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever Eagle One was, she had just changed the outcome of this mission. And she wasn't done yet. For a heartbeat, the desert went eerily quiet, not because the gunfire had stopped, but because the men on the ground were still processing what they had just heard. Over the roar of engines, the rattle of automatic fire, and the chaos of the night, that voice had cut through everything. Calm, steady. A woman's voice. To the SEALs crouched in the rubble-strewn streets, it felt almost surreal. These were hardened operators, men who had lived through firefights on 3 continents, men who carried scars no one could see. They were used to relying on one another, used to voices that sounded as scarred and weathered as their own. But this was different. Chief Petty Officer Ramirez, crouched behind a burnt-out pickup truck, glanced at his commander with wide eyes. "Sir, tell me I didn't just hear that right." Hayes didn't answer. His face was carved in stone, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of disbelief. He was already replaying it in his mind, those 6 simple words, delivered with the kind of composure that most men lost in the heat of combat. "This is Eagle One. I've got you covered." No tremor. No hesitation. No sign of nerves. Just quiet certainty. Another round of gunfire cracked overhead, spraying bits of concrete from the wall Hayes crouched against. The distraction snapped him back. There was no time to question voices or genders. Air support was on its way, and that was all that mattered. Still, he couldn't help but wonder. Up in the cockpit of her FI-18 Super Hornet, Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Lex Ward adjusted her grip on the stick, her gloved hands steady as steel. She had flown missions like this before, but tonight carried a different weight. The request had come through urgent, panicked, the kind of call that meant men's lives were hanging by threads. She had answered without hesitation. Her voice calm, almost subdued, wasn't an affectation. It was who she was in the air. While others shouted or barked into comms, Lex had always believed in control, in keeping her tone, even no matter the storm. Panic on the radio bred panic on the ground. She had learned that lesson the hard way during training, when her composure under simulated fire had been the only thing holding her team together. Now, streaking through the desert sky at nearly the speed of sound, she was about to prove that lesson all over again. "Viper Team, confirm laser designation," she said, her tone flat but firm. Back on the ground, Hayes snapped into motion. He raised the laser designator, painting the target zone with a beam invisible to the naked eye. "Laser hot. Confirm coordinates." Her heads-up display blinked with confirmation. A soft chime told her everything was locked in. She could see them now, enemy fighters moving like ants, scattered around the buildings where the SEALs were trapped. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't just another strike. This was the difference between those men living or dying. "I have your mark," she replied. "Stand by for ordnance." On the ground, the SEALs braced again. Despite the tension, disbelief still rippled through them. Petty Officer Daniels shook his head as he reloaded his rifle. "Man, I can't get over it. That's a woman up there." "A damn pilot." "Shut it," Ramirez growled, though his own eyes betrayed unease. "She's saving our asses. That's all you need to know." Still, the whispers continued. Not malicious, just stunned. They had been trained to expect a certain kind of voice in combat. Deep, commanding, like the men they fought alongside. This felt like an unexpected twist in a script they thought they knew by heart. Hayes cut the chatter short. "Focus on the fight. Eagle One's got the sky. We hold the ground." "Understood?" The men nodded, though some still looked skyward, waiting for proof. From above, Lex saw the chaos unfolding in sharp clarity. Through her targeting system, every movement below was magnified, every muzzle flash a pinpoint of light in the dark. She spoke again, her tone clipped but controlled. "Multiple hostiles around your north flank. Hold position. I'm engaging now." Her thumb pressed down on the trigger. A missile streaked free, slicing through the air before slamming into a cluster of enemies. The explosion lit the desert like a false sunrise, shockwaves rolling over the battlefield. The SEALs felt the ground tremble beneath them. Dust rained from shattered walls, but this time it wasn't enemy fire that shook them. It was salvation. Daniels whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned." No one doubted anymore. Hayes allowed himself a thin smile, though it vanished as quickly as it came. There was still a fight to be won. He pressed his radio again. "Eagle One, good hit. Adjust west. Heavy fire coming from that sector." "Copy. Adjusting," Lex replied. Her voice never wavered. Up in her cockpit, sweat traced along her temple beneath the helmet, but her hands were steady, her breathing even. She banked the jet hard, the horizon tilting as she lined up her next strike. For years, she had fought to be here, in this seat, on this mission. She had fought doubts, sideways glances, whispered jokes in hangars. And now, none of it mattered, because tonight, in this desert, she was the one voice standing between life and death for an entire SEAL team. Back on the ground, the men were beginning to feel the shift. The enemy's fire, once relentless, was faltering under the weight of air power. For the first time in hours, hope bled into the cracks of their exhaustion. Ramirez, who had been skeptical only minutes ago, muttered to Hayes as he ducked behind cover. "Sir, whoever she is." "She's good." Hayes didn't respond. He didn't need to. His eyes stayed fixed on the sky, listening as that quiet, commanding voice continued to guide them. The unexpected voice that had stunned them at first was no longer a surprise. It was an anchor, a lifeline. And as the battle raged on, Hayes realized something he would never forget. Sometimes the strongest presence on a battlefield wasn't the loudest one. Sometimes it came in quiet tones, steady as stone, spoken from thousands of feet above. The men didn't know her name yet. They didn't know her story. But they would never forget the moment when a Navy SEAL commander called for a combat pilot, and the unexpected reply from a woman in the sky changed everything. Before her voice ever echoed across the desert battlefield, before the SEALs had ever heard the quiet confidence that steadied them in the middle of chaos, Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Lex Ward had been fighting another war, a quieter one, but no less grueling. It was a war not against insurgents or enemy fire, but against disbelief, prejudice, and the invisible weight of expectation. She had known since she was a child that she wanted to fly. Growing up on the outskirts of Wichita, Kansas, Her earliest memories were of lying on her back in tall summer grass, staring at the contrails streaking the wide Midwestern sky. Other kids saw shapes in the clouds. Lex saw possibilities. When her classmates dreamed of being doctors or athletes, she dreamed of the cockpit. She didn't just want to fly airplanes. She wanted to fly the fastest, deadliest aircraft in the world. But from the very beginning, people told her it wasn't possible. Her high school counselor had smiled politely when she mentioned becoming a fighter pilot, then gently redirected her toward more realistic goals. Friends teased that she was chasing a boy's job. Even some of her teachers, people she had trusted, laughed it off as a childish fantasy. Lex learned to keep her ambitions quiet. But inside, she burned hotter with every doubt cast on her. At the Naval Academy, the doubts only grew louder. The halls were filled with sharp-eyed, sharp-elbowed men who carried themselves with the confidence of people who assumed they belonged. Lex walked among them with quiet determination, refusing to be rattled by their smirks and side comments. She remembered the first time she strapped into a training aircraft. Her flight instructor, a stocky lieutenant with years of service behind him, had looked her over skeptically. "You nervous, Ward?" She had met his gaze without flinching. "Only about wasting fuel, sir." The engines roared to life, and as the plane lifted into the air, Lex felt something click deep inside her. The controls became an extension of her hands. The horizon became her canvas. Every doubt, every sneer, every laugh faded as the ground fell away beneath her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just chasing a dream, she was living it. But the skies didn't silence her critics. In every class, every training drill, she was watched more closely, judged more harshly. If she made a mistake, it wasn't just her error. It was proof to some that women didn't belong in the cockpit. She could feel it in the whispers behind her, the skeptical looks from peers, even the subtle sighs of some instructors who seemed almost relieved when she faltered. So she stopped faltering. Lex buried herself in training. While others slept, she studied flight manuals under dim lights. While others partied, she logged simulator hours until her body ached. She learned to anticipate turbulence before the instruments warned of it, to sense the weight of her aircraft as if it were an extension of her bones. Her instructors began to notice. Reluctantly at first, then with genuine respect, they saw that she wasn't just keeping up, she was excelling. And yet, the barriers remained. Her first solo combat training mission was a gauntlet. A mock exercise designed to push pilots to the edge. It paired her against one of the Academy's most aggressive male cadets. He'd swaggered into the briefing room, smirking. "No offense, Ward, but try to stay out of my way up there. Wouldn't want you getting hurt." Lex didn't respond. She simply strapped in, pulled down her visor, and focused. The exercise began, and within minutes, the cadet's jet was locked in her targeting system. Twice he tried to shake her, diving and banking hard, but she clung to him like a shadow. The simulation ended with her missile striking his jet square in the virtual fuselage. When they landed, he stormed across the tarmac, helmet under his arm, his face red. "You got lucky," he snapped. Lex removed her helmet, her expression calm. "Funny, I thought it was skill." It was in that moment that her reputation began to change. Not with a loud declaration, not with bravado, but with quiet, undeniable results. Still, the road was long. When she graduated and earned her wings, there were only a handful of female combat pilots in the entire Navy. Each one carried the weight of being more than just themselves. They were symbols, whether they wanted to be or not. Lex felt that weight every time she walked into a briefing room, every time she saluted a superior officer who seemed to doubt her. She knew she couldn't just be good. She had to be exceptional. And so she was. Her first deployment brought her into real combat. The first time she dropped ordnance on a live target, She felt the magnitude of what she was doing. Real enemies, real lives, real stakes. The radio crackled with the frantic voices of men on the ground, and she remembered her training. Stay calm, stay steady, let your voice anchor theirs. When she replied with her now famous quiet tone, the soldiers responded as if someone had flipped a switch. Their panic eased, replaced by trust. That became her hallmark. Not the volume of her commands, but their steadiness. And as mission after mission passed, her reputation grew. Among pilots, she became known as Eagle One, an operator who never cracked under pressure, whose soft-spoken replies hid nerves of steel. Among the soldiers she saved, she became a legend, though most never saw her face. To them, she was a voice in the storm, the whisper that turned chaos into order. Yet no matter how many missions she flew, the weight of expectation never fully lifted. She still walked into rooms where men assumed she was less capable. She still overheard whispers, still felt the sting of doubt. But by then, she had stopped caring, because she knew the truth. Every flight, every mission, every life she helped save was proof, not only to others, but to herself, that she belonged. She didn't need to shout it. She didn't need to argue. She simply needed to do what she had always done. Show up, stay calm, and deliver. And that's exactly what she was doing the night. Commander Hayes and his SEAL team called for help in the desert. When her voice came over the comms, soft and unshaken, it wasn't the sound of inexperience. It was the sound of someone who had fought battles long before stepping into that cockpit. She wasn't just a combat pilot. She was the culmination of every barrier broken, every doubt silenced, every whispered word of disbelief turned into dust in the jet wash behind her. And as she streaked through the sky toward the trapped SEALs, she carried all of that with her, not as a burden, but as fuel. The men on the ground didn't know her story. Not yet, but they would. The desert sky was a canvas of black, punctured by bursts of gunfire and the fiery arcs of tracer rounds. Below, the SEALs clung to their positions, pressed against shattered walls, waiting for the miracle that might pull them from the jaws of death. Above them, the miracle had already arrived, though they did not yet realize just how precise, how relentless she could be. Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Lex Ward's F-Ord's F-A-18 Super Hornet carved a path across the night. The cockpit hummed with quiet power, dials glowing green against the shadows of her helmet. Her hands rested lightly on the controls, a picture of calm and contrast to the storm she was about to unleash. Her voice broke over the comms again, even and unshaken. "Viper team, this is Eagle One. I'm on station. Eyes on your position. Sit tight." On the ground, Commander Hayes glanced skyward. He couldn't see her jet, not with the dust and smoke choking the horizon, but he could feel its presence. The sound was unmistakable, the deep, resonant growl of engines slicing through the night. Relief warred with skepticism in his chest. She was here. But could she really hold back the tide? "Copy, Eagle One," Hayes replied, forcing steel into his voice. "We've got heavy contact on all sides. Hostiles entrenched. We're running low on ammo." "Understood," she answered. "Stay down. I'll clear a path." There it was again, that quiet authority, spoken without hesitation. Hayes didn't know why, but it cut through his doubt like a knife. In her cockpit, Lex's mind was a storm of calculation. Every second mattered. She scanned the tactical display, counting enemy muzzle flashes, mapping their positions, weighing the safest way to strike without endangering the SEALs huddled below. She flew low, the ground rushing beneath her in streaks of sand and shadow. Targets confirmed. "Engaging now," she said. Her thumb flicked the switch. A missile detached from her wing and streaked downward, a glowing arrow slicing the night. It struck the edge of a building where insurgents had dug in, the explosion ripping it apart in a shower of fire and dust. The SEALs felt the blast reverberate through their bones. Enemy gunfire faltered, screams echoing through the smoke. For the first time in an hour, the pressure eased. "Good hit," Ramirez shouted over the din, his voice tinged with awe. Hayes allowed himself a grim nod. The precision was flawless, closer than he would have thought possible without endangering them. Whoever Eagle One was, she was damn good. "Viper team, adjust south," Lex's voice guided them. "I've opened you a lane. Move now." The SEALs didn't hesitate. Under covering fire, they darted from their crumbling cover, sprinting through the gap her missile had carved. Enemy fire cracked behind them, but another burst from above rained down, silencing the threat. Hayes moved with them, his heart pounding, every step a gamble. But the voice in his ear steady, unwavering, kept him moving forward. They dove behind a new wall, safer for the moment. Hayes pressed the radio again. "Eagle One, you're a damn lifesaver." "Not done yet," she replied, her tone almost clinical. "Mark additional targets." The SEALs quickly repositioned, Hayes directing them while Lex circled overhead. From above, she could see what they couldn't: the wider picture, the threads of chaos tying the battlefield together. She spotted a heavy machine gun nest spitting fire toward the SEALs' path. Left unchecked, it would cut them down. "Gun nest, northeast corner." "I've got it," she said. Her jet rolled into a dive, the ground swelling up toward her. She squeezed the trigger, releasing a burst of cannon fire that tore through the emplacement. Sparks and flames erupted as enemy fighters scattered like ants. Down below, the SEALs cheered instinctively. The tide was turning, and it was because of her. But war never stayed simple. As Lex banked back to altitude, alarms flared on her HUD. A shoulder-fired missile streaked from the ground, locking onto her jet. She reacted instantly, flaring countermeasures and diving sharply. The missile swerved and detonated harmlessly in the sky. Her breathing didn't change. Not once. On the ground, Hayes watched the explosion above and felt his gut tighten. They were targeting her now. "Eagle One, you clear?" "Still here," she replied evenly, as if she hadn't just danced with death. "Focus on your fight." There it was again, that calm, that quiet defiance of chaos. Hayes found himself trusting her more with every passing second. The firefight raged on, but the SEALs were no longer prey. With Lex's strikes clearing pockets of resistance, they maneuvered with renewed confidence. Every time they thought they were cornered, her voice cut in. "Enemy flanking left. Suppressing now. Path clear, move. Hold position. I'll take the rooftop." And every time, her ordnance fell true. Ramirez muttered between breaths, "I don't care who she is, man, woman. Alien, she's the best damn pilot I've ever heard." No one argued. High above, Lex remained locked in focus. Her hands moved with practiced ease, her mind 3 steps ahead of the battle. She wasn't just flying a jet, she was orchestrating a symphony of survival, turning chaos into order, one strike at a time. She thought back briefly to her early days of training, to the instructors who had doubted her. If they could see her now, guiding a SEAL team through hell with nothing but precision and a calm voice, perhaps they would understand. Perhaps they would realize why she never shouted, never cracked. Calm was her weapon. Precision was her armor. And tonight, both were saving lives. By the time her third pass was complete, the battlefield looked different. The enemy's fire had thinned, their formations shattered. The SEALs had advanced farther than they thought possible an hour ago. Hayes keyed his radio again. "Eagle One, you've changed the game down here." Her reply came soft, almost understated. "That's what I'm here for." Hayes leaned back against the wall, catching his breath. Around him, his men reloaded, regrouped, and prepared for the next push. For the first time since the ambush began, he believed they might actually make it out. And it was because of her. The mission had truly begun, not as a desperate fight for survival, but as a coordinated push, guided from above by the quiet voice that had stunned them all. The desert village was a storm of chaos, its narrow alleys now scarred by fire and debris. The SEAL team crouched in the shadows of a fractured wall, their rifles hot, their lungs burning with dust and adrenaline. They had fought through impossible odds, each step bought with sweat and blood, but still the enemy pressed in. From rooftops, from alleys, from hidden positions, the fighters moved with a relentless ferocity that threatened to smother them. But tonight, they were not fighting alone. High above, streaking through the black sky like a phantom, Lex Ward's Super Hornet banked hard, her eyes locked on the glowing signatures below. She was no longer just a pilot, she was the wrath of the heavens. Her voice cut through the comms, as calm as ever. Viper team, stay low. This will get close. The SEALs flattened themselves against the rubble, clutching their helmets as her jet roared overhead. Hayes glanced up, catching the faint silhouette of her wings slicing across the night. For a moment, he thought of angels, of guardians, of the strange calm that had come into his men since her voice had first spoken. And the world exploded. A missile tore from her wing, trailing fire as it arced downward. It struck the enemy's eastern flank with pinpoint accuracy, the detonation lighting up the night like a second sun. Flames roared skyward, and the shockwave thundered through the narrow streets, rattling the SEAL's teeth. The enemy screamed, their gunfire faltering as smoke swallowed the battlefield. Target neutralized, Lex's voice confirmed. No triumph, no boasting, just fact. Hayes pressed the radio. Eagle 1, that's one hell of a shot. Keep it coming. Copy. Adjusting course, she replied, her tone clipped and controlled. Up in the cockpit, Lex's world was reduced to numbers, angles, and instincts honed over years of training. She banked left, her aircraft tilting sharply as the horizon spun. Her body pressed against the straps of her seat, but her hands never wavered. Another hostile group was massing near the northern ridge, moving to flank the SEAL's new position. If they reached it, the team would be trapped again. Not on her watch. Her thumb pressed the trigger. A burst of cannon fire screamed down from the sky, shredding the ridge in a storm of sparks and dust. Figures scattered in panic, their formation broken. On the ground, the SEALs moved like shadows beneath her protection. Every strike she unleashed carved them a path forward. Ramirez darted across an alley, bullets sparking at his heels, but before the enemy could lock onto him, a second explosion tore through their cover. He dove behind a crate, chest heaving, and shouted into the radio. I take back every damn doubt I had. This pilot's a machine. Daniels barked a laugh, firing into the smoke. Not a machine. An avenging angel. Even Hayes felt the shift in his men. Moments ago, they had been trapped animals, fighting only to survive. Now, with her fire lighting their path, they fought with purpose. Their movements grew sharper, their confidence steadier. She wasn't just supporting them, she was reshaping the battlefield itself. But Lex knew better than to let confidence breed complacency. Her HUD flared with alerts. A hidden RPG team had set up in a shadowed courtyard, their launcher aimed directly at the SEAL's advance. If they fired, at least 2 of the men would be gone before they had a chance to react. Her jaw clenched. RPG team, Courtyard West, engaging. She rolled her jet into a steep dive, the earth rushing up toward her. The G-forces pressed her deep into her seat, but she ignored the strain. Her reticle locked onto the courtyard, and she released a precision-guided bomb. The blast turned night into day. The courtyard vanished in fire, the launcher and its crew obliterated in an instant. From below, Hayes's voice came ragged, breathless. "Eagle One, you just saved half my team." "Not half," Lex corrected quietly. "All of them. Keep moving." Every strike was surgical, every burst of fire deliberate. She wasted nothing, never fired blind, never risked the men she was protecting. From the ground, it looked effortless devastation falling from the sky like clockwork. But in her cockpit, Lex felt the weight of every decision. The margin for error was razor thin. Too close, and she risked friendly fire. Too wide, and the SEALs would be cut down. She flew that edge with the calm of someone who had lived on edges her entire career. As the battle raged, the enemy began to falter. Their ranks thinned, their morale cracked. The endless stream of fire that had trapped the SEALs only an hour ago was breaking apart under the relentless storm from above. Hayes noticed it first. He peered around the edge of cover, scanning the rooftops. The gunfire was still there, but scattered now, uncoordinated. The enemy's discipline was gone. They were firing wildly, more desperate to survive than to kill. "Eagle One," he said into the radio. "You've turned the tide. We're advancing." "Copy," she replied. "I'll cover your flank." And she did. Every step they took forward, she cleared the path with fire. Every corner they turned, she struck ahead of them, scattering resistance before it could form. For the SEALs, it was like moving under an invisible shield. For Hayes, it was the difference between leading his men into death and leading them into victory. But Lex didn't allow herself to think of victory yet. She kept her breathing even, her eyes sharp. Fatigue tugged at the edges of her focus, but she shoved it aside. She had learned long ago that battle wasn't won by those who shouted loudest, but by those who stayed calm longest. Her voice remained the same, as it had at the beginning, quiet, steady, almost gentle. Yet from that quiet came firestorms, each one more precise than the last. And on the ground, the men who had once doubted her now moved with absolute faith in her. The desert burned around them, but the SEALs pressed forward, step by step, carried not only by their own grit, but by the constant cover from the sky. Every blast, every strike was a reminder that they weren't alone, that someone above was fighting just as fiercely for their survival as they were. Hayes paused once, crouching behind a wall as he caught his breath. He looked up at the sky, watching the faint trail of her jet cutting across the clouds. His men were alive, still pushing, still fighting. And it was because of her. "Eagle One," he said softly into the radio, almost to himself. "Whoever you are, you've earned our respect tonight." Her reply came after a pause, the same calm tone as always. "Respect's not what I'm here for, Commander. I'm here to bring you home." And with that, she rolled her jet once more into the heart of the fire, her ordnance raining down with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a storm. From that night forward, none of the SEALs would ever forget what it felt like to move beneath her cover, what it felt like to fight with fire, from above guiding their every step. The battlefield had transformed. Where once the SEAL team had been pinned and desperate, now the night echoed with the sound of controlled advances. Under the cloak of Lex Ward's precision strikes, the men moved with renewed confidence, pressing deeper into hostile territory. Yet in war, no tide turns without resistance. The enemy, though battered and scattered, was far from finished. They regrouped in pockets, gathering what strength they could muster, determined to push back against the steel rain from above. And for Lex and the SEALs alike, the hardest test was still to come. From her cockpit, Lex's eyes tracked the shifting battle below. The terrain was treacherous narrow alleys, collapsed roofs, hidden courtyards, all perfect traps for men moving on foot. Her jet provided reach and firepower, but she knew she couldn't be everywhere at once. That realization gnawed at her. One mistake, one blind spot, and the men she protected would pay the price. "Viper team," she called over the comms, her voice still calm. "Expect resistance ahead. I see multiple signatures converging 2 blocks north. They're trying to box you in." Commander Hayes pressed against a wall, scanning the alley. His jaw clenched at her words. They'd fought hard for this progress, but now it seemed the enemy was adapting. He looked to his men's sweat-streaked faces, eyes sharp but tired. The fire in them hadn't dimmed, but the margin for error was narrowing. "Copy, Eagle 1, Hayes answered. "We'll need a hole. Can you give us one?" There was the briefest pause before her reply. "Stand by." Lex inhaled slowly, forcing her pulse to steady. This strike had to be exact. Too close, and she'd risk the seals. Too far, and the trap would spring shut. She banked her jet into a low pass, eyes fixed on the northern grid. Enemy fighters clustered there, setting up mortar and preparing to funnel the seals into a kill zone. Her thumb hovered over the release. She thought of the men below, crouched in the shadows, waiting for her decision. Trusting her. She pressed. A precision bomb tore free, whistling through the night before slamming into the enemy staging ground. The blast rolled through the streets, ripping apart the mortar teams and scattering debris like shrapnel rain. From the ground, the SEALs felt the shockwave in their chests. Flames lit up the northern block, smoke curling skyward like a signal flare. Hayes keyed his mic, his voice hoarse but grateful. Paths open. Moving now. The team surged forward, darting through the burning wreckage she'd created. Every man knew it wasn't just an airstrike, it was a lifeline. But then came the counterpunch. Gunfire erupted from the rooftops, sharper and heavier than before. The enemy, desperate, poured everything they had into halting the SEALs' momentum. Bullets screamed down from every angle. Ramirez dove into cover, cursing. "They're not letting go, Commander." Hayes grimaced. They were close to breaking through, but one wrong step could unravel it all. He pressed the comms. "Eagle 1, we're taking fire from all sides. We need immediate suppression." "Copy," Lex answered. Her jet roared overhead once more, her cannon spitting fury. Streams of fire ripped across the rooftops, shredding the enemy positions in surgical bursts. Still, the fighters were relentless, popping up from the ruins, firing wildly, even as her strikes rained down. This wasn't just combat anymore, it was the enemy's last stand. Inside her cockpit, Lex felt the weight of it. Every warning alarm, every flash of tracer fire on her HUD, was a reminder that she was threading a needle in the dark. She couldn't afford to falter, not when the SEALs' lives were tethered so tightly to hers. Her inner voice whispered the same mantra she'd carried since flight school. Calm wins wars. So she stayed calm. She banked left, lining up a strafing run. Her voice cut through the comms, measured and steady. "Viper team, push forward on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Move." The SEALs obeyed instantly. Her cannons roared as they sprinted from cover, bullets chewing apart the enemy nests just seconds before the men passed through. It was a deadly dancer fire, and their movements in perfect sync. For Hayes, it felt almost surreal. She wasn't just supporting them, she was leading them. She was leading every motion from the sky. A battle built to a crescendo. The SEALs advanced block by block, while Lex's strikes fell like hammer blows, breaking each pocket of resistance before it could regroup. But the cost was mounting. Ammunition dwindled, stamina ebbed, and even Lex's fuel gauge dipped lower with each pass. At last, they reached a central courtyard, half collapsed from the earlier bombardments. It was here that the enemy made their final push. Fighters swarmed from all sides, shouting war cries, determined to crush the intruders before they could break free. Gunfire erupted in every direction. The SEALs hunkered down, firing back with grim resolve, but Hayes knew the truth. They were at their limit. One more surge like this, and they'd be overwhelmed. He pressed the combs, desperation edging into his voice. Eagle One, this is it. We need everything you've got. High above. Lex heard the plea. She glanced at her fuel gauge, at her remaining ordnance. She had one last heavy strike left. One chance to tip the scales for good. She rolled her jet into a steep dive, engines screaming, the world tilting into chaos around her. Alarms blared, flares deployed automatically as enemy fire streaked skyward. But her focus never wavered. She locked onto the courtyard, the epicenter of the enemy surge. The reticle glowed red. Her finger tightened. Hold fast, Viper team, she whispered into the comms. I've got you. The bomb fell. It hit like thunder. The courtyard erupted in fire and shockwaves. The enemy force torn apart in a single devastating strike. The ground quaked beneath the SEALs as debris rained down, but when the smoke cleared, the battlefield had changed. The enemy was broken. Scattered cries echoed through the ruins, fighters fleeing into the night. The relentless tide that had pinned the SEALs for hours was finally receding. For a long moment, silence hung heavy over the comms. Then Hayes's voice came through, low and steady. Eagle One, you just turned the impossible into possible. Lex's reply was quiet, almost humble. Negative, Commander. You held the line. I just opened the door. But Hayes knew better. He looked at his men exhausted, bloodied, but alive. Alive because of her. This was the turning point. The moment the mission shifted from survival to victory. And every man there knew they owed it to the pilot whose calm reply had stunned them at the start. Above the smoldering ruins, Lex banked her jet into the night sky, her silhouette a dark guardian against the stars. She exhaled slowly, her hands steady on the controls. The tide had turned. The mission was far from over, but for the first time, victory was within reach. And she would see them through it. The village lay in ruins, smoldering under a cloak of dust and smoke. Fires licked at shattered rooftops, their glow casting long, flickering shadows across the alleys. The once deafening roar of battle had faded into a ragged silence, broken only by the distant crackle of flames and the groans of collapsing stone. For the SEALs, the absence of gunfire was jarring. Their ears still rang with phantom shots, their muscles still tensed for impacts that no longer came. But the silence was not empty. It was filled with something else now respect. Commander Hayes lowered himself against a broken wall, sweat streaking down his dirt-caked face. His rifle rested across his lap, the barrel still warm. Around him, his men slumped into cover, each one breathing hard, their eyes wide with exhaustion. They had been pushed to the brink, tested in ways only warriors in the darkest corners of war could understand. And yet, they were alive. Alive because of her. He looked skyward, searching the night. At first, there was nothing but smoke and stars. Then he heard a low, steady hum in the distance. Her jet, still there, still watching over them. Eagle One, Hayes said into his comms, his voice rough with fatigue. The courtyard is clear. We've got wounded, but we're holding position. Her reply was as calm as it had been hours earlier, as though she hadn't just turned the tide of a battle single-handedly. Copy, Viper team. Stay in cover. I'll remain overhead until extraction arrives. The men exchanged glances. None spoke, but the weight of what had just happened pressed on them all. Ramirez shook his head slowly, his usual cocky grin nowhere to be found. Commander, he muttered, I don't care what anyone says. That pilot's not human. No one fights like that. Daniels, kneeling nearby as he reloaded, gave a grim nod. She didn't just fight, Ram. She saved us. Every damn one of us. Even Quiet Foster, who had barely spoken since the mission began, whispered. She sounded like she was sipping coffee up there. And meanwhile, we were dying down here. The men chuckled weakly, but their laughter carried no mockery. It carried awe. Hayes listened, his gaze still fixed on the sky. Respect among SEALs was not given freely. It had to be earned, often paid for, in blood and fire. And yet, in the span of a single night, this pilot, this woman whose voice had first surprised them, had earned it all. When she first spoke, they had doubted her. A quiet voice, a woman's voice in a world of warriors. They had wondered if she could stand the weight of their mead. But now they would follow that voice anywhere. Hayes pressed his cums again. Eagle One, you've done more than we could ask. You brought us through hell. My men and I. We owe you. There was a brief pause, and then her voice came back, softer than before. No debts, Commander. I did my job. Same as you. But Hayes knew better. There was doing a job, and then there was what she had done tonight. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one carrying the team closer to extraction. In the lull, the men tended to their wounded, passed around canteens, checked ear. But all the while, their ears stayed tuned to the cums, waiting for her voice. It had become their anchor, a thread of calm in the storm. At one point, Ramirez whispered into the radio, his tone half serious, half playful. Eagle One, if you can hear me, don't take this the wrong way, but I think I'm in love. Laughter broke out among the SEALs, lightening the weight on their shoulders. For the first time all night, Lex's reply carried the faintest trace of humor. Stay alive, Viper, and you can tell me that in person someday. The men erupted in cheers, their spirits lifted. Hayes shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. In a single sentence, she had managed what commanders sometimes couldn't. She reminded his men that they were human, that they had a future beyond this night. The respect wasn't only about her skill in the cockpit. It was about the way she carried herself, the calm, the humility, the refusal to bask in praise. She didn't roar into the cums or demand recognition. She spoke softly, precisely, as though she trusted them to understand without theatrics. And they did. As the team prepared to move toward their extraction point, Hayes lingered a moment, glancing again at the faint silhouette of her jet against the stars. He thought back to the early days of his career, to the countless pilots he had worked with. Many were brilliant, fearless, legendary in their own right. But none had struck him quite like her. There was something different in the way she fought. Something unshakable. For a man who had built his life on reading people under fire, Hayes realized the truth. She was one of the rare few who didn't fight for glory, or even for victory. She fought for the men on the ground, for their lives, for their safe return. That kind of fighter earned not just respect, but reverence. When the extraction finally arrived, a pair of helicopters thundering, low over the horizon, the SEALs moved out in disciplined silence. Their bodies ached, their wounds throbbed, but their steps were steady. The worst was behind them. As they loaded the wounded first, and then themselves, Hayes keyed his cums one final time. Eagle One, this is Viper Leader. We're lifting out now. I don't know if we'll meet again, but I'll say this, if we do, drinks are on me. There was a pause. Then her voice came back, quiet as always, but warmer somehow. Copy that, Viper Leader. Fly safe. The helicopters lifted off, their rotors whipping dust into the night. From the side door, Hayes looked back down at the burning village, then up at the sky, where her jet circled like a sentinel. For a moment, their eyes would never meet, their names unspoken. But the bond between warriors needed no face, no handshake. It was carved in fire, sealed in silence, and marked by respect. For the SEALs, that night would never be forgotten. They would carry it in their stories, in the unspoken nods between brothers who had lived through it together. And always, at the center of the memory, would be her, the combat pilot whose quiet reply had stunned them all, and whose calm hand from the sky had delivered them through hell. Silent respect, the kind that lasted a lifetime. The helicopters cut across the night, their rotors beating a steady rhythm as they carried the battered SEAL team away from the ruins. Inside the cabin, the men slumped against the metal walls, bandaging wounds and sipping from canteens. None spoke much. They were too drained, too lost in the gravity of what they had survived. But in their silence, a single truth pulsed between them. They owed their lives to a voice in the sky. Commander Hayes sat near the open door, staring out into the darkness. The wind whipped at his face, but he barely felt it. His eyes searched the heavens for one last glimpse of the Super Hornet that had shielded them. And then he saw it faint against the stars, her jet banking in a wide, protective arc. She wasn't leaving yet. She was watching, ensuring they made it all the way out. Eagle 1, Hayes called into his comms, his voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on him. This is Viper Leader. We've got eyes on you. You sticking with us to the border? Her reply came as calm as ever. Affirmative. You don't walk alone tonight. The words landed heavier than she could have known. For hours, they had fought like ghosts against overwhelming numbers. For hours, they had thought death was inevitable. And now, even in retreat, she remained with them, silent proof that some warriors never waver, never leave their own behind. Ramirez leaned closer to Hayes, his usual sarcasm replaced with raw admiration. Boss, I swear, when we get back stateside, I'm gonna find out who she is. I need to shake her hand. Hayes gave a tired chuckle. Get in line, Ram. You're not the only one. The helicopters reached the safe zone an hour later, touching down on the edge of a fortified forward operating base. Dust whipped across the landing pads as the SEALs disembarked, helping their wounded onto stretchers. Medics swarmed them immediately, but the men moved with a quiet dignity, their exhaustion shielded by the pride of survival. Above, the jet circled once more. Then, with a final pass, Lex's voice filled their ears. Viper Team, this is Eagle 1. You're home. Good work out there. Hayes raised his comms, suddenly struck by the weight of the moment. He wanted to say something that captured the gratitude, the awe, the respect they all felt. But words seemed too small. Eagle 1, he said simply. Thank you. For everything. Her reply came after a pause, quiet and almost wistful. Stay safe, Viper Team. That's all the thanks I need. And then she was gone. The roar of her engines faded into the distance until only silence remained. The SEAL stood on the pad long after her silhouette vanished, each man lost in thought. They didn't know her name. They didn't know her face. But they knew her voice, her calm, her fire. And they knew they would never forget it. In the weeks that followed, the mission was debriefed in classified detail. Reports circulated, commendations were filed, and higher command noted the air support rendered by one Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Ward with bureaucratic detachment. But paperwork couldn't capture the reality. It couldn't explain the way her voice had cut through despair, or how her strikes had carved a path to survival. Among the SEALs, her legend spread quietly, carried in the retelling of that night. They spoke of her not in formal reports, but in conversations over beers, in late-night barracks banter, in the unguarded moments between missions. Ramirez would slap the table and grin. You should have heard her, boys. Calm as ice. I thought we were done for, but she sounded like she was guiding us through a training drill. Daniels would nod solemnly. Not just calm, precise. She didn't waste a single round. Every shot, every strike, it was for us. Even Foster, usually silent, would murmur when she said, "I've got you." I believed her, more than I've ever believed anyone under fire. And in the unspoken agreement of warriors, none of them would ever question again whether a woman's voice in combat belonged. She had answered that question herself, not with arguments, but with action, with fire, with unshakable calm. For Lex, life moved forward much the same as it always had. She flew missions, trained younger pilots, and carried herself with quiet professionalism. She didn't seek recognition, and she never spoke of the SEAL team whose lives she had changed. For her, that night was just one mission among many. But deep down, she knew it was more. On quiet evenings, when the hangar lights dimmed and the roar of engines faded, she would sometimes think back to the courtyard, to the desperate plea in Hayes's voice, to the way the SEALs had trusted her without ever seeing her face. She remembered Ramirez's half-joking confession, Hayes's steady gratitude, the silence that followed her final farewell. And she allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Not because of glory, but because she knew what mattered. They had gone home. Years later, long after the dust of that battlefield had settled, the story of the quiet pilot lived on. It was told in mess halls and training camps, passed from one generation of warriors to the next. Some added embellishments, the way legends always grow, but at its heart, the truth remained. One calm voice from the sky had turned despair into hope. For young recruits, the story became a reminder that strength wasn't about shouting the loudest or posturing the hardest. It was about discipline, focus, and the kind of courage that doesn't need to announce itself. For women entering combat roles, the story became proof that barriers were meant to be broken, that, in the crucible of war, skill and resolve mattered more than doubt or tradition. And for the men of Viper Team, it became a part of who they were. A bond etched into their souls, carried quietly, respectfully, like a scar that hurt less with time, but never faded. One night, long after his retirement, Commander Hayes sat on his porch with a glass of whiskey in hand. The years had added lines to his face and silver to his hair, but his eyes still burned with the clarity of a warrior. His grandson, a wide-eyed teenager dreaming of military service, asked him, "Grandpa, what's the bravest thing you ever saw in combat?" Hayes leaned back, his gaze drifting to the stars. 100 memories flashed through his mind: ambushes, firefights, near deaths, and victories. But one memory stood above them all. He smiled faintly, lifting his glass to the sky. It wasn't the loudest. It wasn't the flashiest. It was a voice. A quiet reply that saved us all. And though he never spoke her name, he knew her legacy was written among the stars beyond the sky, where warriors like her belonged.